Hi, I'm Kimberly Gladden, Director of Discipleship. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Got another great conversation planned for today. We're going to discuss relational discipleship. You know, I posed the question on the invitation, can you have relational discipleship without having relationships? And today we're going to talk about it. We're streaming live from Facebook, YouTube, and if you'd like to enter the conversation, we'd love to have you come in the chat room on YouTube, ask your questions, offer your comments, make your suggestions. It would be great to hear your thoughts. So please join us in the chat room and watch us on Facebook and YouTube. My co-host for today is again Reverend Dan Walker. And Dan, I think you're a relational person, so I think it's good you're here.
I have become such, yes.
Have you become such?
I
Good.
like people like you.
Okay, we're going to hear about some more about that.
Awesome.
And I'm going to hear a little bit of his story. But I'm so excited to welcome our guest today, Reverend Gina Colburn. She's the pastor of Trinity Wesleyan Church. And around this concept of relational discipleship, Gina's name just kept coming up. So we brought her on the webinar today to talk about it. I think by the end of the webinar, you'll understand why Gina's considered so relational. Gina, welcome.
Hello.
And glad to have you with us. I just want to remind our listeners that as we begin this conversation, we are talking and working our way through the 5 discipleship prompts, those questions that you can ask your church model, and even ask yourself. And that is my discipleship or my life as a disciple, is it intentional, relational, holistic, multiplying, and lifelong? And so today we want to zero in on being relational. You know, most churches are probably more fluent in one area than another. It's almost like the 5 love languages. You know how you can speak, usually one is your core one. Same thing for churches. As we look at these 5 prompts, there's probably one that you're stronger at, and maybe one that needs to be a little bit more developed. So today we're going to zero in on relational discipleship. So Gina, let's talk. First of all, your church has experienced dramatic growth over the past 4 years. You've gone from 60 to 400. So, I mean, that's the first thing we want to hear about. Tell us a little, what happened? Tell us the story.
Well, I have been at Trinity now for 4 years this August, and when I came, the church really needed some direction and kind of a restart as they were just trying to figure out where they were, who they were. They're in a great location. We're right off one of the main highways in the Lehigh Valley. And so there was a good group of people, a good core of about 60 people. And so we just started to talk about what it would look like to reach 1% of the Lehigh Valley. And so our mission is to reach 1% of the Lehigh Valley with the love of Jesus Christ.
Hey, could I stop 1 second? I just want to put a plug in to say that's intentional discipleship. You had a target. Sorry, that just caught me. As soon as you said that, boy, there's intentional discipleship. Okay, keep going.
Sure. Anyway, so I started talking about that like within just a few months of being there, that we're going to reach 1% of the Lehigh Valley. And Allentown, Pennsylvania is the fastest growing city in the state of Pennsylvania. They're making suggestions that perhaps it'll outgrow Pittsburgh in the next 15 to 20 years. And so Allentown, the Lehigh Valley area, has around 900,000 people. So what would it look like to reach 1%? Well, that's 9,000 people. That's a lot of people. And for 60 people to grasp onto that dream and that hope of we need to be more intentional about reaching outside of our walls. So to do that, we focused inside of our walls just for a little bit, and we cleaned up the place. We made our children's area a place where all kids would want to go. I told them that it needed to not look like a nursing home, but rather a children's area. And so we painted and we made it lively, and we just put some intentional focus on being a place where families would want to be. And then from there, we just started doing some community outreach programming. One of the things that I love that we do is we have Connect cards each week, and for each Connect card that people fill out, we make a donation back to our ministry partner for the month. And so some of our ministry partners are a crisis pregnancy center, the homeless shelter. We've made a partnership with 2 of our local schools in Allentown that are at high risk, and we call it our R&R. It's Ritter and Ramos. And we provide uniforms. We're there every week in the classrooms. We just did a huge teacher appreciation thing. So I guess how we did it really is we just became really intentional in building relationships in our community for us to be able to reach our community that we're in. We're also a voting place. So one of the highlights of the last 4 years was election day, the presidential election. And we had around 4,000 people show up to vote. So from 6:30 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, I was out in our parking lot parking cars of people who came out to vote. And we did hot dogs and water and donuts and cookies and took carts down the lines of people waiting to vote all day long. And again, just to reach people, to get to know our neighbors. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I can say that we've done, and a lot of prayer, um, a lot of prayer, and a lot of walking in obedience wherever God says, this is which step I want you to take.
Gina, that's a perfect example of just something that happens in many churches and the difference in someone who thinks relationally. Because lots of churches have, their voting places, but it's just kind of you walk in the door, you kind of wonder which way to go, try to follow the signs. It's a little isolated. And I'm just hearing, the relational part that, hey, we have people coming into the building. This is an opportunity for us to show some love and love on them, even though they're coming to vote. Let's show some love, and so we're just kind of seeing, right off the bat, not only your intentionality, but how you're using opportunities to their fullest. So the church starts growing, and now we have that's a big change from 60 to 400. How does that change the dynamics of the church?
Oh my goodness, it is a huge change. So one of the things that we had to do now, it'll be a year and a half ago, is we had to go to multiple services. So to change a church from one service to two services was a really hard adjustment for some, because the old saying of, I won't know everybody anymore. Well, you really didn't know everybody to begin with, but now you may not even see the same people. And so we did that intentional move to be able to create more options and spaces. We needed the spaces at that point. We were filling up our sanctuary, and so that was one of the changes that came that people adjusted fairly well to. Now we're at a season where we're looking at a third service, and I kind of am shaking my head a little bit about that, just myself, on what that means as a staff and as for me to go to another service. And people are handling it pretty well. It also changed the dynamics of just how we operate. Again, the board is learning the different changes that comes for them when you're not making the day-to-day decisions anymore, but you have a staff that's kind of making those decisions, and they're in the details, and you're just more or less being the checks and balances and making sure that we're following policies and keeping to our budgets. So those are some of the, I guess, the things that we've dealt with the most change. Is just the dynamics of how everybody operates and how we worship and how drastically different that looks.
Gina, can you talk a little bit more about that as well? Concerning, with 60 folks, you can, as the pastor, be connecting with a lot of them at a decent level compared to coming up on 400 where it ain't going to happen anymore, right? So can you talk a little bit about that, your personal relational discipleship mode, and then what systems or how have you ramped up the church to step in to relational discipleship along the way also? Has it been events or has there been purposeful training? But what does that look like from you personally to the church having to be that relational piece?
I think that's perhaps been the hardest on me personally, because I am highly relational. And you've probably heard it said that when a church reaches 200, all systems break, like all processes, everything that worked before all of a sudden doesn't work. Yes, I'm experiencing that. We are in the process. This whole summer, really, we're focusing on all of our processes and how we manage things as a staff. And one of the things that I'm having to do is realize that I will no longer be intimately involved with every person that comes in the door, meaning I may not know everyone's story. A staff pastor may know that, or their small group leader. And
Right.
So I'm becoming intentional about feeding into my staff and my vision team. And then out of that, they need to be intentional about feeding into those around them. It has been an adjustment. I remember as we started, and I hired a assistant for me that was going to start handling my appointments, just that small thing that you couldn't just call me and set an appointment up, but you had to call the office. And so I sent out an email and I approached it. I said, hey, I want to still be able to meet with you and talk to you, but at this time, instead of calling me when you have a need, we need you to call the church office and get that on my calendar. And then I would say, from the front saying, hey, we're so excited about all that's happening here, but my schedule is full and we still want it to have spaces for you to come in and speak to me if you need something. So if you could just call and take care of that through the church office, I would appreciate that. One of the other changes was we took my cell phone out of the bulletin under
Good
contact
call.
information. Yeah, because that was a lot.
Yeah.
and I'm still kind of reeling from some of that because it was in there for a while. So now I kind of go back and forth with, do I need a new cell phone number? Because a lot of people still have my
Still
number.
have it. Yeah. Yeah.
And we live in this world of social media. And so it's not just like people call you or text you or send you an email. They now Facebook private message you or Instagram a direct message, Snapchat you,
Yep.
all ways that you are connected to people. And so I try to manage that well. I used to, if I got a private message at 10 o'clock at night, I would answer that. And now I'm like, no, I don't.
Can't.
It's okay that this waits till morning or
Yeah.
or whatever. So it's been an adjustment, I think, for everybody, and one that we're still, I think, trying to navigate a little bit.
Yeah, and one follow-up question with that. You seem to be very relational from the front in the church.
Yes.
You enjoy interacting with people. Can you give some of the behind the scenes? Is all that just you? Is it just kind of what flows naturally? Because some people it just flows naturally. Or were you intentional as the church grew to say, I'm going to have to continue to take that public sphere to make relational connections with people in a group level because I can't make them individually? But whether natural or whether you had to work on it, what are some of the things you do to try to take those group experiences to make those relational connections happen?
I wanted you also to back up just for a second to give an example. Dan, she
Great.
told me a great story, and I want to lead into that because
Awesome.
I want her
Awesome.
to jump from that. But you told me a great story about what it meant for you personally to be relational. That this, if you could share a little bit of that story, I just thought how cool. And then that's going to take. Then we're going to jump
Right
in
into it.
because I don't
Perfect.
want to. I don't want folks to miss this part. So,
Great.
Gina.
So I am naturally relational. That is something that I do naturally. One of the things that I tell my church people that we have to be intentional about building relationships with everybody we see. That doesn't mean everybody will be your best friend, but you're going to come in contact with people at the grocery store, at the bank, at the park, but at your restaurants, the people who desperately need Jesus. And so people tease us that we have a relationship or we have a ministry to waiters and waitresses because we go out to eat a lot or whatever, and we tend to build relationships with the ones waiting on us. And so about a year and a half ago, a new restaurant opened just down from the church, and we started going there regularly. And we realized that there was 3 waiters and waitresses that we had mostly. So now we request these 3 every time we go in. And if they're all working, they get a little jealous on who gets to wait on us. But our church made these pens that are really nice pens that have a stylus on one end that you can use with your smartphone as well. And so I tell people, take these pens with you, and the next time you go out to eat, a pen is like $1 million to your waitress. They're always looking for a pen. And so leave that for them, and then you're just a connect point back to the church. So I left these pens for these 3, and one of them came to me last June, I believe, and she was waiting on us that day, and she told me she's in her 20s, and she said, I've been given a gift, but I don't want it. And I knew immediately she was telling me that she was pregnant, and I said, I know it's not what you planned, but I'll walk with you, whatever you decide. And she said, well, I've already made the decision. I've scheduled my abortion. And I said her name, and I said, is there any way I can change your mind? I said, I will help you find a family. I will help you take care of this baby. Is there just anything I could say? And she said to me, don't judge me. I've already made my decision. I said, I'm not judging you. I will walk with you no matter what. And so over the next couple of weeks, every time I went in, we would talk about it and she would cry. And I just, would say to her, I love you. I'm going to support you. But would you just think about a different option? And she said, no, I've made up my mind. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to walk with you through that too. And so then it was like the first week of July or something to that effect. And I went in and she met me at the door at the restaurant. And she said, I just want you to know I'm going to do this. And I said, yeah, I know. And I told you I'd walk with you. And she said, no, I'm going to keep the baby. And so this
Wow.
March, I got to be there the day that she had that baby. And I held in my hands a true miracle. I'm going to try not to cry, as her death date had been set, but God had already set her birth date. And so one of the ways that I felt like to be authentic in walking with her as a single mom who's a waitress, I babysit for her one day a week. And so on Wednesdays, I leave my office at about 1 o'clock and I go home and I get to watch this sweet little baby. And she goes to church with us on Wednesday evenings. And then she comes and picks her up when she's done working. But that's what I do. And the other two the one's a waitress and one's a waiter there, come to church. One's another single mom and she has a little boy and she's never been in church her whole life, never. So when she walked in at the age of 21 with her 3-year-old, she had no idea what to expect. And we have great conversations. She's good for me. The things that she asks about when she comes to church that she has no recollection of what it would mean, or she doesn't even have any context. It helps me to make sure that I'm not talking churchy and I'm talking to people who don't know what this thing is that we talk about. And so that's just one of many stories. But yeah, I'm highly relational, and how that kind of translates back into my ministry is I can be relational from the front because it's who I am, but now I even find that I'm more intentional about that because I do want people to be able to relate to me and to know that I care about their story and their life, even if I'm not walking day to day with them, if that's now someone else in the church.
That's great.
And I think, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And any particular things that you use from the front that you could share with us, of those particular things where you say, if I'm able to do this, my love and care for them will be displayed. Not manipulating the crowd, but instead revealing to them, because it's your heart, right? But any particular things from the front that you are able to do to bring that across?
My whole family is involved in my ministry, and so my husband is my worship and arts pastor, and both my boys are on the worship team. My daughter is one of the main workers in the children's department, and so I think one of the ways that I continue to show that I am just like them and being relational is I bring my family into it, and we talk about the struggles. I just did a sermon last week. We're in a sermon series called Friendology, how to have healthy relationships in today's culture and in today's world. And so I said, do you know what happens when a pastor is going to preach on healthy relationship in their home, like in your family? It means that you and your spouse are going to fight all week. That's what it means. Just to say, look, I'm normal. I'm right here with you. It's not been a good week at my house, and I'm going to get up here and preach today on how you should have healthy relationships inside your home. And you should know that I didn't have healthy relationships this week. We did have healthy relationships because we worked through the conflict. But we're just like you, and we're in this together. And so I think just being real with where I am. I hear that a lot from the people that go to our church. They love that I am authentic and real, and I don't try to be something I'm not. I don't think that works. I don't think anybody wants that anymore. They want to know that you're struggling with the same things that they are.
That's fantastic.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Absolutely, that's great. I appreciate it too. I think it's really good.
Gina, just want to kind of circle back a little bit now and even piggyback on what Dan was kind of getting at earlier. Sometimes you have like a very relational pastor, but how does that translate into the DNA of the church? How do you get your heart into your leaders, into your the rest of the congregation? How does that translate? Or have you been able to pour that? Not that they're all going to go babysit on a Wednesday afternoon, but how do you translate that?
Well, I think one of the things that I did at the beginning, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that now, is every month I did a coffee with the pastors in our cafe area of the church. And so I would have our leaders, out of our 6 vision team members, I made 2 of them pick which ones they were coming. So that there was always some vision team members there. But for new people or people who just wanted to know more about the church, and it was about an hour long, and we would just spend time talking about who they were, what makes them like Trinity, what brought them to Trinity, and then they would get to hear from me and my heart. They would also get to hear the heart of the other leaders. And I think through that process, the other leaders really learned how to communicate with people in more of a relational way versus a business way. I think sometimes we can become pretty businessy in the church and pretty churchy. And we forget that these people really just want to live in community. I say a lot that we should be more welcoming than the local bar. And so why does everybody want to be at our local bar or the local gym? It's because people are talking like them and to them and trying to live in community with them. And why can't we do that in the church? It doesn't need to just be this awkward thing that people walk into on Sunday morning where we have a sing along and you have no idea what the person up front's even talking about. It needs to be more relational, which is why the cafe is such a big deal in our church, and probably one of the biggest things we need to address because we've grown so much. But I think that's how we've gotten into the DNA also. I changed board meetings and vision team meetings to be highly relational. So I start with pretty pointed accountability questions for my vision team, like how's your relationship with your spouse? How's that going? When was the last time you prayed over your spouse? When was the last time you shared your faith? We set goals as a staff and vision team on how many people we're going to invite to church, and like before Easter, from January to Easter, we made a goal of 100 people. Between now and July, we have a goal of 200. How are you inviting people? This is more than just, dropping a card. This is building a relationship with someone that you want to see come to know Jesus Christ. The other way that I think we've done it from the church level is about once every 2-3 months, we'll have them be intentional about saying, who's someone in your circle that you know needs Jesus, and I want you to write their name down, and you're going to hand that in, and I'm going to be praying over them. But when that person gives their life to Christ, we're going to pull the name out, and we're going to celebrate that. And so I think just being intentional about me always talking about, you need to be talking to people about Jesus. You need to be building relationships with people. And some of the other ways we've done that, we started a Zumba program, and so we have a Zumba ministry. We have Zumba in the church all but Wednesdays and Sundays. About 200 women come through the church each week to do Zumba. Crazy. And yet it's how we build relationships. And I'm in the hall and I'll walk down and say, hey, how's everybody's day going? And, that sort of thing. And some people say, well, I don't have the space to do things like that. We're using our fellowship hall as the place where they do Zumba. And we had an Eagle Scout project come in and put all new flooring in that's hardwood, and it works. And so we don't have a gym or anything like that. We're just trying to be creative in our ways that we can reach into our community. And people have really, really bought into that. And even the new people that come in, they immediately say, wow, this is one of the friendliest churches I have ever been to. I mean, as soon as you walk in the door, someone is talking to you, and it's not even their job.
Is this something you've stressed in, like, say, in the meetings that you've had with folks? I mean, is there like an intentional strategy, or how has this come about that that you would have that kind of reputation of being such a friendly church?
It is. It's something that I talk about in our membership classes. It's something I talk about in my sermons. Like I try to, at least in one of the sermons per sermon series, to talk about being relational and how we're going to use that for evangelism. I don't know that the word evangelism is a real popular word with the unchurched. So I don't think they understand that, but they understand community and they understand relationships, and they are longing for healthy relationships. They're really longing for someone to be authentic and love them. And authentic doesn't mean, I tell people this all the time, authentic doesn't mean that you say everything that you think. We can have filters and we can have relationships with people that are different than us. I am very intentional about that as well, that we're going to cross party lines, socioeconomic lines, all of these things. We're just not going to like people who look like us, act like us, vote like us. we are actually going to build relationships with all sorts of people. And God's just been opening so many doors because of that. And so I am very intentional in that. Would I say it's a strategy? Probably, because it's who I am, and if we are going to reach 1% of the Lehigh Valley, it will be because we are going to do that through relationships. One of the things that we're looking at doing this year is opening a coffee shop in our neighborhood, not in our church, but in our neighborhood, where it would become the hub of that community. We would offer after-school tutoring and counseling, and just a place for young adults and kids to come and have a cup of coffee and do their homework, hang out, and that sort of thing. So all built around relationships, and the church is very excited about that. Very excited.
That's great. And I love hearing the intentionality. And you started talking about the people who don't look like us. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are the strategies you've put in place to move beyond the typical segregated church experience? How are you all pressing into that? What obstacles have you run into? What has started to be successful with you all in trying to break down the segregation walls within the church and be a community that is experiencing the diversity of the kingdom of God manifest in the local church?
So I guess one of the things that one of the people groups, for lack of a better term, I don't know that I like saying it that way, that we have been ministering to, and we have somewhere between 15 and 20 of them right now, is the LGBT community. So I, on any given Sunday, have, like I said, almost 20 in that community who come. And we have had amazing conversations. And I'll tell you how that happens. It happens because you have relationship with them. And some of them came through the Zumba program. Others now have come through other avenues. And so how we have addressed that is I did a funeral for one of their partners a year and a half ago. And I sent out an email to our leaders, and I said, I want each and every one of you at this funeral. And you're going to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
Awesome.
You're going to love people right where they are. And we had about 400 people in our small sanctuary that holds about 250 show up for this funeral. And a couple of the leaders and I stood at the back that day and shook hands and loved on people. And I would say probably I had over 150 people say to me, either shake my hand or hug me and say, I've never heard that Jesus loves me. And it was just unbelievable. And so one of the ways we're doing that is we're talking about the hot topics. We're talking about the things that I think that kind of create barriers. We did a whole sermon series on racism.
Right.
And said, look, this is not okay. This isn't who we're going to be. We have a great African-American gentleman who plays the drums for us, or I guess it's the congos. I don't know. It's one of the percussion instruments. And he is on the stage every week, and we love him. And because of that, his heart, he gives me a different perspective, and he talks to me openly and honestly, and I talk to him openly and honestly about what it means to be a white female leading a congregation, And it's funny because in those conversations, the only thing I can relate to is that being a female pastor isn't always fair. We have some barriers that perhaps our male counterparts don't engage in. And so that's nothing compared to what some of the African American community has faced, but that's the only thing I can relate to. And so I try to get on their level and say, well, this is what I've experienced. And so tell me how that relates to what you're experiencing. And then we share those things. So I bring them on the stage and we talk about it, or in the small group settings, and we say, hey, this is how this works. We want to have open, honest conversations, but let's make sure that we have one clear focus, and that is Jesus. At the end of the day, it's to draw all of us closer to Jesus. It's not to divide us. And Jesus came for all people, no matter their skin color or how much money they make or what their sexual orientation is. He came for all people, and he is in constant pursuit of them. So that's kind of the ways that we're addressing it. We're just being open and honest, and I get up and say when I don't have the answers, and I say these definitely in these meetings that I have one-on-one with some that come to our church. Look, I don't have all the answers, but this is what I know. And if I can help you in your faith journey, that's what I want to do.
We're talking with Reverend Gina Colburn from Trinity Church about relational discipleship. So we just want to remind you that if you have questions or comments, you want to hop in on this conversation, please do so. You can do that online. Gina, I want to just press a little bit. There's probably a lot of good things we can chew on there.
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah, Dan will be coming back with a question in a moment. But I want to. This is some things that maybe doesn't always happen at a church. When you talk about being welcoming, when you talk about reaching diverse people, pushback. Are you getting pushback? Two things I want to ask you. One, are you getting pushback, and how has that affected the congregation? And two, with the congregation being so relational, do you ever get the sense that the relational piece maybe is edging out some of the other pieces if we were to look at that 5 discipleship prompt? So just kind of a twofold question.
So I think that how has the church handled it? I have a couple in my church that has been attending Trinity for 56 years. They are in their 70s. She worked for United Wesleyan College because it was in Allentown, just a few miles away from our church before it closed. And every church needs this couple in their church. Like I said, they're in their 70s. And he said to me shortly after I came that he went out and bought him some Nautica jeans so he could wear those to church instead of his suit so that he could relate to any and everyone who walked through our doors.
Wow.
That's great.
And their influence on the core of people is huge because they have discipled them. They have been there through the good, the bad, and the ugly of Trinity. And so if there has been any type of pushback, when you have kind of the matriarch and the patriarch of the church that's been there that long, stand and support and just cry. I mean, every week, almost he's in the back just crying at what God is doing. It really changes perspective. And I really talk a lot about kingdom. And so anytime somebody comes with pushback, although I've got to be honest, I've had very little. And so because I talk about it from the front, we do it on one-on-one and say, hey, look, this is about God's kingdom. And how will they know that Jesus loves them if we don't tell them? But more importantly, how will they know it if we don't show them? This isn't about just preaching to them. And to be honest, I have not preached one sermon against homosexuality. Everybody knows where I stand. We talk about what is the biblical form of marriage and how God designed that. But to get up and just say, this is sin, and, they know that. They know where I stand. And the one-on-one conversation, especially in the last 6 months, oh my goodness, I wish I could share them, are powerful. And so pushback, I'm not experiencing. More questions on how they can adapt their way of thinking. So some of the older ones that come in and maybe are just like, I don't know what's happening, they're coming in with hearts of, I want to learn and I want to be able to change so that we can continue to reach people. And remind me of what your second question was. I'm sorry.
I was asking in terms of the 5 discipleship prompts, with relational discipleship just being one, in terms of the others, intentional, multiplication, lifelong, and the others. I was wondering if, in a general sense, because you're so relational, does that ever seem to like overshadow other initiatives in the church, or does it seem to like take get all of the attention, or how do you balance that out?
So I think one of the ways that we have grown this much so quickly is because of the relational piece. So the other pieces have probably suffered, which is why we're looking at this summer revamping kind of everything that we do so that we can be more intentional, that we do have a process from the time someone walks through our door to the time they leave or die or whatever of discipleship. And so those are things now that we're working on getting in place. Last year, we did do an intentional kind of next step program for those who had just given their lives to Christ, that were kind of basic beliefs and prayer, worship, devotions. What does it mean to be a Christ follower? Followed up by a little bit deeper study and then a spiritual gifts testing. So yes, I think that some of that can be pushed to the side, and we realize that what grew us to this place will also not continue to sustain us if that's the only piece we focus on. And so I'm in the process of hiring more staff and trying to get just hands on deck to do some of these things.
That's, we just celebrate with you what's happening there. And as I was saying earlier, we brought you on to talk about your strength in this area because there are a lot of people, it's also natural and organic with you, but there are a lot of people that this whole relational piece doesn't even come into play. So wanting you to, hear from you about what it's like to lead with relationship. And obviously it's working. If you have gone from 60 to reaching for almost 400, there is something about that because there's some people who would dismiss that. Dan, I'm going to turn to you for just a second here and
Great.
and ask you, when we start talking about relational discipleship, what comes to your mind?
So before I answer that, let me just backtrack a little bit because, Gina, I'm glad you brought up that you are a female. Which is great. I am so excited that I am with two great women leaders in the Wesleyan Church, pastors, ordained ministers, and I just want to take a minute to say I really value who you are, and I love that the Wesleyan Church is a church that says we believe in your calling. We know that you have a place not just to be in the church and be quiet, but to be in the church and to speak forth the word of God, to lead. And I think we would not have as rich a conversation today or about relational discipleship without you all standing up. And Jen, thanks for being honest as well, too, that there are some difficulties there. And that's not to minimize or, others have great difficulties as well, too. But I just want to say, as a male minister, I recognize that there's many people still in our world, in the Christian church, who do not recognize and value you for who you are. But that's not me. And there's a whole group of us who see in the Word of God and the calling of God, and then that is manifest in your activity in the community and in leadership, that affirms that what we see in Scripture is right. You have a calling and a place, and it's a very valuable place. So thank you, and it's an honor for me to be sitting among three of us and to be the only male at the table. It's not often that you get such an honor in Christian ministry, and I wish we had it more often. Particularly, and I'll take just 1 second to say my wife is amazing. She's an ordained minister, PhD, theologian, amazing, gifted woman. And so I get to witness firsthand the giftedness that comes from that. And so thank you for being who you are and stepping out into ministry in the way that both of you have. Now, with that, I've got to be honest. For me, I love the idea of having relationships. It's a really cool idea. If I knew how to do it, it would be awesome. My DNA is a reluctant relational person. I'm shy, I'm quiet. I want to be so relational. I want to have all the friends and naturally just connect with everybody. And in Florida, before I stepped out of the 12 years at Love in the Name of Christ, one of the people asked me, Dan, how do you so naturally just love all people? And I told him, honestly, I don't. Before Christ and before Christ's calling, it didn't happen for me. In fact, even after that, I came into the first local church. And a few years in, I recognized I serve God and I preach the word and I minister to people, but none of them are my friends. And I removed everybody else from my life because I was too busy with the call. You laid everything aside. And at a certain point, I recognized that I was laying aside things that God had not called me to lay aside. Relationships with people, right? And so for me, there's certain things in my life where I walk out my giftedness, but there's other things where when anybody recognizes that I'm a relational person, someone who loves others, I've got to say it is only Christ's love flowing through me, because in and of myself, I'm not a good lover of people. I want to be. I desire to be that, but find in myself I have no good gifts to offer. So, Gina, it's great to be talking with you today. that it's somewhat the opposite for us. I'm that like, God have mercy on me, help me be that. And by God's grace, I think over the last 17 years of ministry, I have, though starting down the wrong road, quickly you find life is unhealthy and messed up when you don't have good relationships in your life. And it really forced me to reevaluate and dig into the love of Christ and allow that to flow through as a gift that is not of me at all.
Dan, I happen to know something about you, and
Oh,
that's
boy.
why I call. Well, I know a lot of things
boy.
about you, Dan, but I'm only going to share one thing right
Okay,
now.
good.
The whole point that your confession that, hey, because a lot of folks are sitting out, they're listening, and they're saying, that is
Good for
not
Gina. She's
me.
awesome.
Yeah, Gina, that's awesome. You can do that, but I could never do that. But then I happen to know that God worked on your heart and brought you into a situation. You were working with homeless individuals, and even though you would say that might not be my primary discipleship language, tell us about what God did. There was a case where you got kind of close.
Very much so, and for me, I was at what we later called Victory Life Wesleyan Church in Merritt Island, Florida. We were there first, me by myself, and then when Joanne joined me when we got married. But we were there for 8.5 years, and my first few years as a single man, I read in the Scripture that when a stranger comes, you welcome them in, and when somebody's hungry, you feed them, and so it was natural for me. We had a 4-bedroom parsonage. It was me and my 70-pound boxer, and so we opened up the parsonage, and for 2.5 years before I met and married Joanne, I lived with the community that did not have a home. My home became their home, and we shared it at the church. And honestly, when I was coming up to becoming married, I looked at my life, and there was my friends of the past. There was some people in the church, but for the most part, my closest friends were the men who lived with me. And there's nothing wrong with that in one sense, in the sense of, these were the people closest to me. We lived together. We were in community together there in the church every day. But then also there was a recognition for me that all of my life was with people who were coming without health. And I think that helped me open my eyes also. It's really easy to judge people who are stuck in cycles of poverty, particularly generational poverty, because they want freedom but don't know how to get freedom, so end up making bad decisions. And I really recognized there was a lot of guys there who they had plenty of friends, but no friends that could stand up when they needed somebody to lean on, right? And I think I came to grips at that point as well, recognizing that the only people in my life were the people I was serving, and that were coming completely disconnected, maybe very much connected to spirituality and to God, but to the place where we could have a mutual, caring, giving back and forth relationship. It was a difficult time for me. That gave great passion to me to care for folks, but also to come with healthy relationships, a more holistic discipleship model, if I could say, using one of our prompts, where it is a holistic process coming to the table.
Thank you, because folks listening, you can say, "Hey, at least I'm doing a little better than Dan."
Here's what not to do.
Here's what not to do. Gina, I want to turn back now and throw the question out to both of you. As we think about discipleship models, as we just think a little bit about that, are there any ways that we can think of that we can build relational discipleship into our models? Are there, I know you're thinking of revamping some things, and we're just having, honest conversation today. These are things that all of our churches we're looking at, we're walking through. Some of us are in different places on the different ones, but we're together trying to ask these questions and think about this whole concept of relational discipleship. So, Gina, I'm turning back to you now and asking, are you have some thoughts that you might have about intentionality in the area of relational discipleship?
One of the things that I think Jesus modeled for us so well was how he discipled, and he did that through relationships, and he also did it in the big crowds. But when I look at his interactions with people, he went into the community. You think of the woman at the well, so you think of the well as being maybe our local coffee shop. He went in and he found them right where they were. They were hurting, they were needing something, and he had what they needed. And then he also showed up in the courtrooms of people's lives. I think there's a woman caught in adultery, and she was getting ready to be stoned. And so even though the courtroom was outside, that's where Jesus showed up. He did discipleship. He showed them exactly what it meant to be loved and that their lives could be transformed if they had a relationship with him. And then he had his 12, right? The 12 leaders who were just wonderfully awesome and also broken and messy. And he did life with them. He spent time investing in them. And then he had those 3 that were really close to him that he invested maybe even a little bit deeper level. And then he had the large crowds, of course. But I think so for me to be intentional, and I think for the church to be intentional, the relationship piece has to be pretty high on the priorities, because without relationship, people don't care what we have to say. When I think about all the different things and conversations I'm having with people who are completely unchurched, who have never walked through the doors of a church, they really don't care who Jesus is or any of that until they know that I care about them. And you only can do that through relationships. And so that's something that is really, I'm intentional about telling people, look, you want to get to know your neighbor. And the only way you're really going to do that is if you sacrifice your own time and your own will and your own stuff so that you can have time for these other things that God's calling us to. And so we need all of the pieces, all the pieces of discipleship. But I really think it starts with the foundation of relationship. And I say to you, Dan, you're right. Not everybody is high relational. I get that, but you can surround yourself with people who are. And because I know that I'm highly relational and I need help in some of the other areas. I mean, my staff is relational, but not near like I am. But they're great administrators and they're great behind the scenes. And so I think knowing our strengths and weaknesses as leaders and how we can tap into those so that we can be effective in what God's called us to is very, very important. And also understand that He is going to stretch us in those areas that we're not maybe as good at as others. And so we can learn and continue to grow and continue to do His kingdom work. I think that answers your question.
I was thinking as you were speaking, Gene, I was thinking of an experience that I had, and in terms of people, if you are open to them wanting to talk and wanting to have religious conversations. I remember one time I was on a cruise, and I was in line to check in, and I had my books with me, a stack of books, and people turned to me. They said, "Why do you have those books?" I said, "Well, I want to read." And they said, "Do you know what kind of cruise this is?" And I'm like, "No." They said, "Well, it's a heavy metal rockers cruise." Okay, didn't know that. But as I got on the cruise, it was so interesting, particularly people who were struggling with their sexuality. Once they found out that I was a minister, and this had never happened on any of my other trips, they started setting up appointments to meet with me on the cruise. I felt like on the cruise, one after one, wanted lunch, can we meet? And for them, it was the first time they felt that, hey, I can sit down. Now, they quickly learned my stance, and I quickly told them, where I stood. But they felt comfortable enough to sit down and have conversation. And they said that just being approachable, just having a conversation. And so I'm saying that to say that this whole concept of being relational, just opening ourselves, just being open at least for conversation and for presence, and to have even those tough conversations, with folks. So I'm just excited about what God's doing there. When we think about also this whole concept of relational discipleship, there's a discipline aspect to it that our lives are so busy, particularly here in the American context. We're just busy. And our clergy lives are tremendously busy. So if we're to have relationships, there's also an aspect of discipline, I think, that comes in. And I continue to work on that, even with I continue to challenge myself, because sometimes you feel like, what little time I have, I just want it for myself. And God has called us to be in those relationships with His model of the 3 and the 12 and the 120 and the 3,000. And so, just any other thoughts that you want to share with us? you heard Dan talking, so he was saying, he was representing those who say, hey, I'm not the most relational person. Gina, any other thoughts of some of the things that your church has done, or things that you've done over the years that kind of show that hospitality, or show that relational aspect of a church? Anything else come to mind, or a story that comes to mind?
I think one of the things again that we've just been intentional about is finding if we're to reach the people that are struggling with, whether it's the homeless, the hungry, the kids, whatever, what are the avenues that are already out there that we can partner with? And so I was very intentional before I came to Allentown of building a partnership with the local school district of where I lived in the Midwest. And so when I came to Allentown, that was one of the things that I thought I should really work on. And it took me a long time. Like I said, I've been here 4 years. And finally, in February, I had a meeting with the school superintendent of the Allentown School District. And we sat down and we really talked about what it would look like for community partnerships. What if each public school had one nonprofit and one business partnership, and those nonprofits being churches? And they were able to come in and help in the classrooms and do different things like that. And so when God opened the door for one of these schools, it's about 20 minutes from our church. It's actually about 25 minutes. And I was really like ridiculously having a bad attitude about it. Like I didn't have pastorly thoughts. And I was driving my first day to go and volunteer there. And I was like, God, why am I driving 25 minutes from the church? I mean, there are schools right beside our church. Why I don't understand why you've opened this door, but whatever. So I get there and I'm assigned to a classroom and I go up and I'm in a kindergarten classroom and the teacher's like, who are you? Why are you here? And I said, well, I'm with Trinity Wesleyan Church. And she's like, yeah, I get that, but nobody comes down here and helps. And I said, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. And she said, well, what do you do? And so I'm like, oh, here's where I have to admit I'm the pastor. And I said, well, I'm the pastor. And she's like, oh, she said, where is your church at? And I told her where it was at. She's like, on Centronia Road? And I go, yeah. And she says, oh my goodness, I vote there. I live a block from your church. And as soon as she said it, it was as if God said, see, Gina, I really do have all of this. You just have to trust me. And now I can tell you story after story of us driving to the school 25 minutes away and the connections they have back to our church and the people that they know and the conversations that we're having and the relationships that we're building because God knew that Trinity Wesleyan needed to be at that church. And maybe someday he'll open up the doors for us to be in the one right, in our neighborhood. But right now he's got it all and we just have to trust him. So he does well at hitting me over the head with a 2x4 when I need it. But I would just, I guess, encourage people to walk through those doors, even if it doesn't make sense. You may never see on this side of eternity how it fits into the plan, but I promise you it does. You just have to stay the course and keep walking through those doors that God gives you to walk through.
Gina, I think that's good, and I want to say the same for those of us out there who aren't naturally relational people. For me, I would say today I love those relationships, but it's not out of me, right? And so for those of you out there who may be saying, man, I don't see it or I can't do it, that's what the gift of God is for. It's a gift that he bestows. Sometimes we have to walk through it, not because it flows naturally, but because we say, God wants me to love, God wants me to be relational, God wants us to be in that school, we're going to be obedient. And then watch God do something bigger than us, right? And then next thing you know, the person who's not relational finds that love flowing. The school that shouldn't be a good connection becomes the good connection. And you look back and say, God knew what he was doing the whole time. He's in control. We just need to be obedient, walk through it with him.
Dan, that's really the point of the prompts, to ask
Right.
us to allow God to look at our discipleship lives, look at our discipleship models, and help us in those areas where we need help. And
Yep.
relational, I'm real relational, but there's some other areas that
Yep.
I sure do need the grace and help of God, and that's what our conversation's about. Gina, I want to thank you for coming on today. I want to thank you for being so open about your journey, and we're just celebrating with you all that God is doing. That's just remarkable in today's context, to go in such a short time from 60 to almost 400. That's a remarkable in
Exciting.
Allentown, PA, of all places. So it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story.
Yes, thanks for having me. It was great. And as you said, just because I'm relational doesn't mean I'm killing it on all the others. And I need people, and I need God, and I need God's grace
Yeah,
to help me in those areas. So I have to
that was good.
sometimes schedule my non-relationship days. How's that?
Yeah,
That's
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 great.
what these webinars are all about. We're just iron sharpening each other in various areas. So thankful also to Dan for sitting in. So thankful to those of you who are listening. I want to close with just a couple of announcements. I want you to put on your calendar. Our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, July 19th at noon. So if you want to go ahead and kind of protect that space on your calendar, we're going to have another great conversation. This time it's going to be about holistic discipleship. What does that mean? And I attended a wonderful festival of discipleship at College Wesleyan Church. So I just want to send a shout out to them we had a great conversation, great speakers, and I want you to keep your eyes open for the things that are happening around the Wesleyan Church in this area of discipleship. Lastly, I want to say that some of us are leaving for the discipleship cruise conference on Monday, and we do ask your prayers as we are going to be doing some intensives and some deep dives into discipleship issues. It'll just be at sea. So blessings and God's peace to you. I hope to see you on July 19th.